مذكورا. إنا خلقنا الإنسان من نطفة أمشاج نبتليه فجعلناه سميعا بصيرا. إنا هديناه السبيل إما شاكرا وإما كفورا. إنا أعتدنا للكافرين سلاسل وأغلالا وسعيرا. إن الأبرار يشربون من كأس كان مزاجها كافورا. إن الأبرار يشربون من كأس كان مزاجها كافورا عينا يشرب بها عباد الله عينا يشرب بها عباد الله يفجرونها تفجيرا. يوفون بالنذر ويخافون يوما كان شره مستطيرا. ويطعمون الطعام على حبه مسكينا ويتيما وأسيرا. إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات.
صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ويسقون فيها كأسا كان مزاجها زنجبيلا عينا فيها تسمى سلسبيلا. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر. فصل لربك وانحر. إن شانئك هو الأبتر. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات.
امشب شب جشن میلاد است. از او خاطر بعض از برادرها میخواستن شعر بخوانند در مدح حضرت پیغمبر اکرم صلی الله علیه و آله و سلم و امام جعفر صادق. از برادر ما فریدون جان خواهش میکنیم که شعر
به نام آن که هستی نام از او یافت، فلک جنبش زمین آرام از او یافت. راضی شده بودیم به املای محمد، اما نرسیدیم به معنای محمد. هر آنچه که دارند رسولان همه دارند، از معجزه خاک قدمهای محمد. مولاست همان رحمت امروز پیامبر، مولاست همان رحمت امروز پیامبر. زهراست همان رحمت فردای محمد. تفسیر کمالات جلالی علی بود، تفسیر کمالات جلالی علی بود. لا حول ولا قوت الا محمد. این وحدت محض است و این وحدت محض است و دوییت به میان نیست. خوابید اگر شیر خدا جای محمد. اسلام محمد و جز اسلام علی نیست، اسلام محمد و جز اسلام علی نیست. منهای علی یعنی منهای محمد. در آینه فاطمه دیده است خودش را، بنشست محمد به تماشای محمد. هر زبانی که فرستد به محمد صلوات.
Next we have Sister Samira Amini.
به نام خداوند شعر و سخن، نخستین سخن در همه انجمن. سلام عرض ادب خدمت شما تمامی شما حضاران گرامی و بزرگان مجلس. امید که جور و صحتمند باشید. من هم به نوبه خود فرارسیدن میلاد منجی دو عالم حضرت محمد مصطفی صلی الله علیه و سلم را بر تمامی شما تبریک و تهنیت عرض می‌دارم و پارچه شعری را که تهیه نموده‌ام را به سمع شما می‌رسانم. راضی شده بودیم به املای محمد، اما نرسیدیم به معنای محمد. هر آنچه که دارند در رسولان، همه دارند از معجزه خاک قدم‌های محمد. مولاست همان رحمت امروز پیامبر، زهراست همان رحمت فردای محمد. تفسیر کمالات جلالی علی بود، لا حول ولا قوت الا محمد. این وحدت محض است و دوئیت به میان نیست، خوابید اگر شیر خدا جای محمد. اسلام محمد به جز اسلام علی نیست، منهای علی یعنی منهای محمد. در آینه فاطمه دیده است خودش را، بنشستم محمد به تماشای محمد. تشکر.
Next we have brother آقای یعقوب آزرده. آقای یعقوب آزرده تشریف دارن. Please recite the salawat for all the brothers who recited Quran, poetry, and also our sisters who recited Quran and poetry. Please recite a loud salawat. And we're going to listen to Manqabat by Brother Sayyid Mushtaba, and then after that we will have speech, inshallah.
برای سلامتی خودتان، خانواده‌تان، ظهور فرج آقای امام زمان صلوات. اللهم صل علی محمد و آل محمد. صلوات دوم جلیتر. اللهم صل علی محمد و آل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. یا رحمان یا رحیم. ای کار تو جمله کردگاری احدا، شغل تو همیشه بردباری سمدا. ما را ز گناه شرمساری کافی است. خوب است برای ما نیاری ابدا. محمد عربی کابروی اردو سراست، کسی که خاک درش نیست خاک بر سری و علی امام من است و منم غلام علی. هزار جان گرامی فدای نام علی. صلوات اللهم صل علی محمد و آل محمد و عجل فرج. امشب زمین کند به سماوات سروری، امشب نسیم مکه کند روح پروری، امشب به دور مکه مه مهر و اختران، از زهره تا زحل همه گشتن مشتری و امشب ز خاک رفته بر افلاک موج نور، امشب به عرش فرش کند کوس برتری و آمد خلیل بت شکن دهر با تبر، افتاد لرزه بر تن بت‌های آزری و بت‌هایی که به نغمه تهلیلشان بلند، احجار مکه کرده به تقدیس گوهری و نوشیروان ز کنگره قصر خویش و تن، بشنو سرود مدلتو داد گستری، دریای ساوه رود ساوه شدن خوش، حیرت برن هر دو به اسرار دیگری و تاج شرف نهاد خدا بر سر بشر، افتاده شور در ملک و حوری و پری و مسدود شد بر روی شیاطین ره سپیر، از کاهنان گرفتن شده علم ساحری و آتش کده خموش و بتان سرنگون بخاک، افتاده نطق پادشاهان از سخنوری و مرد و زن و فقیر و غنی و کوچک و بزرگ، خوانند عاشقان سرود برابری، باید دهن یک سر قوم و قبیله ها بر دست یکدیگر دست برادری، محشر نگشته واقعه محشر آمده، ملک وجود پر شده ز آیات محشری و رازیست بس شگفت ز آیات سرمدی، سریست بس عجیب ز گفتار داوری و باور کنید نور عدالت دمیده است، باور کنید طی شده دور ستمگری، باور کنید مژده میلاد احمد است، باور کنید عید بزرگ محمد است. ایاد خلق دیگر و این عید دیگر است. باور کنید عید خداوند اکبر است. آینه جمال نبی را نگاه کنید، آینه جمال خداوند منظر است. بی جبرائیل بانگ خداوند بشنوید، زیرا خدا به وصف نبی مدح گستر است. زیباترین کلام الهی درود اوست، انک از هرچی بگذری سخن دوست خوشتر است. از کاخهای سرخ یمن تا قصور شام، با نور آن جمال منور است. ایامنا محمد تو فخر انبیاست، دستش ببوس که از همه پیغمبران سر است. ای آمنه نام عزیز تو نامش محمد است، نامش محمد است و محمد پیامبر است. از خالق ملائک و کل کائنات بر ماه عارضش صلوات مکرر است. صلوات اللهم صل علی محمد و آل محمد. این آفتاب کشور دل نور و علی است، این جان جان و جان گرامیش حیدر است. این بحر رحمتی ز عالم وسیع‌تر، در گرانبهای چنین بحر کوثر است. این است آن که یک نفس رو بخش و با طاعت تمام خلایق برابر است. پای غلام درگه او بر فراز عرش، دست وسیع او بر سر اهل معشر است. این اولین تجلی حق ختم انبیاست، هرچند در مقام نبوت مؤخر است. از صبح در جلوه و جلوه نخست تا روز حشر گفته و عرف آخر است. باور کنید در شب میلاد مصطفی بت‌ها شعارشان همه الله اکبر است. باور کنید چون نفس حضرت مسیح امشب نسیم مکه همه روح پرور است. پیشانی ملائکه بر خاک آمده، باور کنید خواجه افلاک آمدن. آینه جمال الهی جمال اوست، بام سپهر پله تخت جلال اوست. ماه جلال سرقدان خاک آستان، همچون هلال قامت گردون هلال اوست. مهر سپهر در گل لبخند گم گشته، مهر سپهر در گل لبخند گشته گم. لبهای خضر تشنه جام وصال اوست. چون حسن بی مثال خداوند بی مثال، برهان آفتاب رخ بی مثال اوست. برهانم آفتاب رخ بی مثال اوست. خون جاری از دهان، گل لبخند بر دو لب، خلق عظیم تا ابدیت مدال اوست. گفتار صاحبان خرد دون شأن وی، اوهام انبیا همه محو کمال اوست. دست خدا نموده لوای ورا بلند، ملک وجود مملکت بی زوال اوست. لبخند دوستی برای دشمنان زدن، حرف نخست سوره حسن خصال اوست. اهل بهشت تشنه لب جام کوثرند، کوثر ببین که تشنه جام وصال اوست. ایمان لطیفه ز گفت و شنود وی، قرآن صحیفه که پر از خط و خال اوست. هر شم را شراره از شعله فراق، هر جم را قیامت از شور و حال اوست. ذکر ملک همیشه درود و سلام وی، چشم خدا هماره و ماه جمال اوست. باور کنید عزت دنیا و آخرت در سایه محمد و قرآن و آل اوست. باور کنید روز و شب و ماه و سال ما مشمول فیض روز و شب و ماه و سال اوست. تا عبد ذات پاک خداوند سرمدیم در سایه محمد و آل محمد. دریاب خستگان غمت راز حادثات، ای دستگیر شاگدا پیر و جوان یا علی مدد. ورد ما این از دائم الاوقات که به زهرا گل گلزار محمد بلند صلوات. الله صلی علی محمد و
Please recite a loud salawat for our dear brother Sayyid Mushtaba Mahdawi. Please recite another salawat for your marhumin, especially for the marhumin of the sponsor of tonight. Please recite a loud salawat. Please recite another salawat for the volunteers who have decorated this stage beautifully. They have done a lot of beautiful works, especially this stage. Please recite a loud salawat for them. ولادت با سعادت حضرت ختمی مرتبت خاتم الانبیاء والمرسلین حضرت محمد مصطفی صلی الله علیه و آله و سلم و همچنین ششمین اختر تابناک آسمان امامت و ولایت امام جعفر صادق علیه السلام حضور تمامی بزرگواران تبریک و تهنیت باد. انشاءالله بعد از ختم سخنرانی برنامه قطع کیک است. بعد از قطع کردن کیک انشاءالله صرف طعام، بعد از طعام برنامه کهوت است، سوال جواب، و بعد از برنامه کهوت اهدای جوایز است، فرکشی است. قسمی که همه دوستا با برنامه آشنایی دارن تا پخش میشه و انشاءالله در ختم پروگرام جوایز برای همگی داده میشه و جوایز خاص برای کسایی که نامشان محمد و جعفر است امشب در نظر گرفته شده. I would like to congratulate all of you on this special, auspicious occasion of the birth of the symbol of humanity, the peak of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and the head of our mazhab, the sixth Imam, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam. After speech, we will have the cake cutting program. After cake cutting program, we will have dinner. After dinner, we have kahoot. with the prizes, and then we will do raffle at the end, inshallah. Special raffles for those brothers whose names are Muhammad and Jafar. Muhammad and Jafar will get special treat tonight. امشب شب جشن است. جشن میلاد پیامبر نه تنها در زمین بلکه در آسمان ها برگزار میشه. فقط 2 دقیقه وقت شما بزرگوارا رو میگیریم، بعد از انشاءالله همراه سخنرانی آغاز میکنیم. امشب شب مبارک احیای انبیاست، زیرا شب ولادت آقای انبیاست. در یک وجود جلوه کند عالم وجود، در یک جمال صورت زیبای انبیاست. عید بزرگ جان و جهان جان، عید خدا و سید و مولای انبیاست. دوران غربت بشریت سر آمده، یعنی شب ولادت پیغمبر آمده. امشب خدا به اهل زمین آسمان دهد، ملک وجود را شرف جاودان دهد. امشب خدا جمال دلارای خیش را با روی دلربای محمد نشان دهد. با پرتو جمال منیر رسول خیش، تا صبح عشر نور به چشم جهان دهد. جان در طبق نهید که میلاد احمد است، اعلان کنید بر همه عید محمد است. ای آمنه محمد از انبیا سر است، این بر همه پیامبران هم پیامبر است. قرآن او که وحی الهی است شاهد است، این از پیامبران اولوالعزم برتر است. قدر و کمال و شأن و جلال و مقام او، حتی در انبیای سلف فوق باور است. این طفل نه که قافله سالار انبیاست، آگاه باش هر نفسش وحی کبریاست. این یاور تمام ضعیفان عالم است، این منجی همیشه اولاد آدم است. این رهنمای گمشدگان تا قیام حشر، این شمع جمع خلق رسول مکرم است. یا رسول الله، تو تا قیام حشر چراغ هدایتی، با هر کلام صاحب اعجاز و آیتی. تو تا ابد پیامبران را پیامبری، بر فرد فرد صاحب حکم و ولایتی. در بین انبیا و امم این شعار ماست، ما امت توی محمد عنایتی. میسم مدیح خان تو بودست و آل تو، هرچند نیست در خور قدر و جلال تو. بارها گفت محمد که علی جان من است، که به جان علی آن جان محمد بلند صلوات. Please join me in welcoming our dear respected brother, Dr. Shakil Virji, to the member with another salawat.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Okay, we are coming from 2 months and about 10 days of the Azah of Muharram, and this is the first happy day. So let's all get comfortable, and in our comfort, let's recite a loud salawat. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، وخاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد صلوات. والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، واللعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين أما بعد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتاب مبين والقرآن المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Come on, we need a little bit more energy in our salawat. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah, Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Jazakumullahu khairan. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know, the verse that I just cited, it's a very famous verse, you've all heard it. It's verse number 107 from Surah Al-Anbiya. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. I have not sent you, Allah is saying about our Holy Prophet, says, I have not sent you except as a mercy, and he uses the word alameen, not for the earth, not for a particular place. Alameen is the universe. So Allah is saying that I have not sent you except that you are a mercy for the whole universe. That's first. Secondly, Allah uses one of His own attributes, Ar-Rahman, the merciful God, one of His most important attributes, which He asks us to recite every time, for example, when we recite Quran, when we recite Salah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That attribute He is assigning to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and saying that I have not sent you except that you are a mercy to the mankind. So the first part that I want to introduce here is the importance of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's number one. I want us today, inshallah, we'll try to get this message across, that let us study why this is a mercy upon mankind, A, and B, what was the depth of the mission of Rasulullah, in terms of when he came and what the situation was of the world at that time. If I am assigned the job of a teacher, and I go to a classroom, and in that classroom, all the students are, let's say, B students. And I want to now make them A students. My effort, relatively speaking, is to try and get those B students to A students. That's all. That's number one. Now, if I had students who were E minus, and I want to try and get them to an A plus status, my workload is a lot more and my mission is a lot more challenging. Secondly, if I come from a very qualified, comfortable life, I am qualified, I'm wearing a nice suit when I go in front of the classroom, as I am going to this mission of trying to teach these students, I'm comfortable in my life, my mission is a little bit more, substantial, and it's going to be a lot more easier. But if I come from a place where I am a nobody, I'm an orphan, and I have to now come to this stage where I have to take people from the state from being an E minus to all the way to A plus, you can imagine how challenging my mission is going to be. So I want to today, rather than talking about the biography of our dear Prophet, I want to describe the circumstances, the situation, the hal of Arabia at the time before he came to begin the mission of Islam. What was Arabia like before Islam came? The first thing we learn is that there was absolutely no law. People were living in complete anarchy. The only law that they knew was tribal law, and everything that they did was to satisfy tribal needs. If somebody from another tribe came and did something to someone in my tribe, what do? I get my army together from my tribe, get on horses, and we go and fight everybody in the other tribe. And this was a war that was happening, revenge all the time. And wars were being conducted to try and increase their power, to try and satisfy their greed, and for individual warriors to try and become famous so that people in Arabia would start talking about them. Nobody was living in peace at those times. There was no law. There was no ethics. There was no morality. People were just randomly doing whatever it is that they wanted to do just to satisfy their own personal, tribal and personal needs. The only reason why they would not engage in any kind of war or any kind of attack on another tribe after somebody did something to them was if they were afraid that if the other tribe was stronger than them and they would attack them again, then they would be afraid and say, you know, we better not touch them because when they attack us, they're going to win and we're going to lose all of our power and our situation. So this was one of the things that was there. There was no law. There were no principles. There was no guidance. There was no lines that people were drawing in terms of how they would conduct themselves. The economics of that time, what was it? Slavery, buying and selling slaves. The Jews that were living in Medina, you know, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, okay, they were the dominant merchants of those times. But most of the Arabs that were living there had absolutely no idea of commerce or anything until later on. These caravans that were coming from Syria and Yemen began to start with the introduction of Hashim, one of the great grandfather of our Holy Prophet. That's when commerce and all of these things start to happen. And what did the Arabs have to trade? In the beginning, they were trading materials that the Jews were producing in Medina, because the Jews in Medina had some kind of industry going on. They were making arms at those times, you know, for fighting. You know, not very different from what is happening today. But in those days, they were doing that. And also, they were charging interest, absolute high interest. You know, brothers and sisters, look at the economy in this country today. None of us, or very few of us, would be able to go out there and purchase a house or a car without taking a loan from a bank. Well, many of us don't have the kind of cash to go and purchase something outright. You know, especially if you want to buy a $300,000, $400,000 home, you have to take a loan. Now, it's nice if the loan is designed to try and help those who cannot afford, you know, come up with a plan in which they are able to afford something that otherwise they would not be able to afford. But that's not what's being meted out, my dear brothers and sisters. Go and calculate. Today, if you buy a house and you take a loan from the bank, what happens? Many people don't realize this. In the first roughly 50% of the term of the loan, suppose you take a 30-year mortgage, the first 15 years of the mortgage, you are only paying interest and very little principal. After 15 years, that's when you are now beginning to start paying for this house that you have purchased. This was the state, the hal in those times as well, my dear brothers and sisters, except that the people then were taking advantage of those who were unable, and they were sometimes charging them 100% interest, 200% interest. The idea of usury, riba, okay, was existing in the pre-Islamic days, and when Islam came, you know what happened? Completely demolished, taken out of the system of the society. So that was the situation, you know, back in the day. Slaves, as I mentioned, you know, earlier. People completely lost their humanity and were traded like commodities between different, between different people. Socially, it was a male-dominated society where women had no position. You know, what ended up happening is that a son, for example, would inherit the wives of his father, except the mother, his biological mother. But all the wives of his father would be inherited by the son. They were treated in a very derogatory manner. They had no rights, they had no say. There was a custom in Arabia in those days that if a person, you all know this, when they had a female child, they would bury the child alive. Brothers and sisters, it was so bad that even if a person who has a heart, who has some empathy, if he had a female child and did not want to bury that child, just the pressure, the peer pressure from the rest of the society would force him to go and bury this child. There are so many things that are happening in this world today. We don't have slavery in the way that slavery occurred back in the day. But you know what, my dear brothers and sisters? We become programmed here to try and accumulate material gains that is beyond our capacity, so much so that we become slaves to that material that we are buying, and then you and I work day and night to try and pay off this lifestyle that we have created for ourselves. It's not slavery by force, it's self-inflicted slavery because we stop thinking sometimes. We don't realize what our capacity is, and we dive into this materialistic slavery that used to exist, in those times. Women were practicing outside the bounds of marriage habits that today are, today in the Western society is accepted. In Islamic society, of course, it's not accepted. There is a picture, I have seen this, and I'm sure you have seen it on YouTube, of this scene on a beach in France, where a woman who was wearing a burkini had gone in the water and was forced out onto the beach by the police there, and she was forced to remove the burkini. Whereas the women that were there who were wearing the swimming costumes that women, generally the Western women wear over here, very revealing, very immodest, was something that was acceptable at those times. And the law now was trying to force women to being immodest. The women in Arabia before Islam, circumstances were forcing them to be immodest and practically sell their bodies to try and survive. That was the social structure, at that time. What was the religion pre-Islamic? Most of the people were believing, they're mushrikeen. They were idol worshippers, And there was, the idols basically came. Every tribe had a different god. Every society, every community had a different god. And you ended up that these gods were being brought to Makkah and put into the Kaaba, so much so that they had 360 idols inside the Kaaba. So there was polytheistic religion going on. And also, in those days, there were people who were influenced by the Persians, and others, they were worshippers of fire, they were worshippers of the stars. But in addition to that, there were Jews, a good number of Jews that were living in Medina, in those days, who basically had migrated from Jerusalem after the Christians had defeated Jerusalem. I think it was like 70 AD or something like that. And in running away, they were living in Medina in those times. So when they came in, some of the Arabs did convert to Judaism. And there were some Jews in those days. Also, there were some Christians. We know the famous Christians of Najran, that is talked about in the Ayat al-Mubahala. There were some Christians in those times. So this was the general situation in those days. And now, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. His mission now was to take this society and completely reform it. So that's the first challenge. But what were the circumstances in which Rasulullah was born? Let's look at that history. In about 400 AD, one of the ancestors of Rasulullah by the name of Qusay, had a son called Abd Manaf, who had then a son called Hashim. These three were very much known as people who were reformers within limits of Makkah. Because there were two types of society that lived in that time. There was the nomadic, people who were roaming around all the time, and there were the sedentary, people who actually established little towns. Makkah and Medina were the little towns basically in those days that were established places, and the Bedouins, they hated it because they thought the Meccans were somehow weak in their sense. In any case, when Hashim was born, Hashim was one of the first ones to start and establish the trade in Yemen and Syria. They would go in the summer, they would travel north towards Syria, and in the summer they would travel south towards Yemen in caravans to try and trade, and they would take whatever they had in commodities, they would take them down, and they would buy things from there and bring them back, to Makkah. And it was in an organized way, which Hashim, the Banu Hashim comes from him, was the first one to establish that. And he had also established what is known as the League of the Virtuous, a small society like you have around here, the Round Table and all of this. There was a society then called the League of the Virtuous, and their mission was to try and help those people who were in need and try and help people against any kind of injustice, that was coming to them. So we start seeing that within the lines of the ancestry of our Holy Prophet, there were people, or his ancestors were people who were righteous thinkers. Why were they righteous thinkers? Because the religion that they followed was the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, and they were called the Hanif. They were from the millat of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. They were monotheistic. So these were the people who were beginning to create the reform. Hashim, had a son called Abdul Muttalib, and now the story begins. Abdul Muttalib had a son called Abdullah, who was the father of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, I'd like the youngsters to really pay attention, because this is, there is a little bit of history here that I think it's important for us to know. So Abdul Muttalib had a son called Abdullah, and when he was about 17 years old, when Abdullah was married to the mother of our Holy Prophet, Lady Amina. Question, now, as part of this lecture, I'm going to start saying that who is more knowledgeable, who is more of a lover of the Holy Prophet. Is it the men or the women? At the end of the lecture, we're going to make this judgment. If the women win, the guys have to buy the women some kind of a gift. And if the men win, the guys get nothing, because you're going to get nothing anyway. So that's how this is going to fly. Okay? The guys get nothing. That's how it rolls. So, how long, this is for the women, how long did the marriage between Abdullah, the father of the Holy Prophet, and Lady Amina last? What was the length of time that Hazrat Abdullah was married to Lady Amina, because Hazrat Abdullah passed away? So what was the length of the time that they were married? Any women, any lady? Because the answer then is going to go to the guys. Now don't Google it, come on. Anybody? Okay. From the men, any answers? Huh? No. 7 months. Okay, 7 months. So nobody got any points this time. Okay, what had happened, is Hazrat Abdullah died before the Prophet was born. He lost his father before he was born. So what I'm trying to create the picture here is to try and say how disadvantaged our Holy Prophet was. And as I mentioned, that if somebody comes with a tie and a suit and he's a professor and he's teaching something, his challenge is different. But here you have, look at who's coming now to reform the world. Okay, he was an orphan before he was born. So 7 months is the length of the time that Hazrat Abdullah was married, at that time. Prophet was born without a father. Lady Amina was taking care of him. It was customary in those days that when the child, is capable enough to be separated from the mother, they would hire a wet nurse. And this child would then be taken away out into the wildlife, into the desert, to live there for a couple of years for two reasons. One is the fresh air, the environment. Supposedly it's a healthy environment, it's non-polluted, it's good for growth and good health of the child. And secondly, because Makkah was a commercial area where people from all over were coming into Makkah, the language, the Arabic language was getting corrupted. There was another kind of Arabic that was forming, and the article that I was reading called it the Pidgin Arabic. It's a mixed up of all kinds of languages with Arabic. And the Arabs of those times did not want to create problems with the language, so they would send their youngsters out into the desert where pure Arabic was being spoken, so that they would learn the language, in the outskirts of Arabia. And it was a habit even of the aristocrats in Arabia to send their kids out with a wet nurse, to go out there. So, the second question, we're going to start out with the guys. What was the name of the wet nurse of the Prophet, and how old was the Prophet when his mother died? Guys. Okay. What was the name of the wet nurse, number one? Halima. And no. It was Halima. Okay, and how old was the Prophet when his mother died? When his mom died? No. Well, the answer I don't have. The ladies? No. 6. That's the answer. He was 6 years old. Okay, again, illustrating the disadvantage. He lost his father before he was born, and his mother when he was 6 years old. So now you can imagine the extra disadvantage. Just try and imagine that, a 6-year-old child. This is a special child, of course. We're talking about Rasulullah, okay? But just imagine in context of this, a 6-year-old child without a mother, without that nourishment from a mother, an orphan. He's going to now reform the world. Can you imagine the challenge of Rasulullah in that type of circumstance? Immediately, Hazrat Abdul Muttalib, his great-grandfather, took over. His grandfather took over the care of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, in a little while, Hazrat Abu Talib, also, was beginning to go on the deathbed, and he summoned all his children to come by his bedside. And he asked them, he says, I'm going to leave you two things behind. One is, of course, that who is going to be the chief of the Banu Hashim after me. One. And two, who is going to take care of this child? Talking about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. None of the sons, initially, agreed to taking care of Rasulullah. They all wanted the succession. They all wanted to become the chief of Banu Hashim. But they didn't want to take care of the child. Only one person did. Hazrat Abu Talib, as we all know. But you know what he said? He came to his father, Abdul Muttalib, and he said to him that I will take care of Muhammad. I'm not interested to be the successor of the Banu Hashim. In Abdul Muttalib's mind, that made Hazrat Abu Talib qualified for the job of being the successor of the chief of Banu Hashim. So Hazrat Abu Talib alayhi salam was picked to be the chief of the Banu Hashim. So now, the next question. Question number 4. Coming back to the ladies. How old was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when Hazrat Abu Talib adopted him? 8. 1 point for the sisters. Okay, so guys, get ready. The next question is coming to you guys. He was only 8 years old when Hazrat Abu Talib took him and started, adopted him. And he took him in a way that, it was really taking care of him. They took him into the household and treated him in a loving manner more than what they would have, of their own child. When Prophet ﷺ grew old enough, he would accompany Hazrat Abu Talib when he went on these missions to Syria and Yemen in these caravans. So our Prophet began to learn some of the secrets of the trade and so on and so forth. And in these traveling, he started to interact with the people and started to develop relationship in the society that he was living in, so much so that they started to bring things to him in trust. You know, he started to build the reputation of being Al-Amin, the trustworthy, and As-Sadiq, the truthful. Even, you know, the people who may not have liked the Banu Hashim, they would bring their goods, and they would bring their wealth, and they would bring their jewelry and their money or whatever to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and ask him to keep it in his custody. He developed that relationship. At one point in time, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Hazrat Abu Talib, knowing the situation of the business, and he knew this woman by the name of Lady Khadija, and said, you know, felt that if our Prophet, he's not announced his prophethood yet, but if he goes on a trip with one of the caravans of Lady Khadija, who had a huge caravan, much bigger than a lot of the people that had it there. You know, then he will learn the trade a little bit more. He will be able to interact with people in a different way. And he convinced Lady Khadija to have our Prophet accompany this caravan. Guys all know the story. You know, when he came back, that particular mission was so successful. And when our Holy Prophet was told about it, Lady Khadija decided to give her hand to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, you know, in marriage. So for you guys, the question now, okay, what was the thing that convinced Lady Khadija to marry our Prophet, and how old was the Prophet when the marriage took place? Let's try and come out some other guys. How old? No, 23 is the wrong answer. 25. What convinced him? What convinced her, rather? Yeah, there's a partial answer. We'll accept it. Okay? His entire demeanor, his trustworthiness, how he dealt with the people, in the just way in which he conducted all the transactions that he was doing. It was, you know, there was no hanky-panky in the business. It was all pure. It was clean, you know. And when she found out about it, said, you know, this is the man that I want to marry. Remember something, my dear brothers. You know, she was an entrepreneur. She was a businesswoman. And a lot of the influential people in Mecca wanted to marry her. They went and proposed to her. And she denied everybody. But this orphan of Abu Talib, when he went on just one mission on her behalf, and what happened in that mission was enough to convince her that this is the guy, you know, for me. This is the one that I wanted to marry. So that's one of the big milestones, you know, that occurred in his life. And it was an exemplary marriage. Lady Khadija, okay, we all know, I mean, she was a businesswoman. You know, this whole idea that, you know, I don't want to marry a woman who's making more money than I am. You know, some of the guys have this attitude. Well, that's not Rasulullah. Okay? 100%. Lady Khadija made a hell of a lot more money than Prophet Muhammad would ever dream of. You know, that was not the basis of decision. Yes, she was an independent entrepreneur, whatever you want to call her, successful. Malikatul Arab, the Queen of Arabia. There was a title that was given to her. Okay? That did not discourage our Holy Prophet to marry her. Number one. Number two, the trust that developed between the two of them. Lady Khadija basically spent all her wealth. She basically took all her wealth and sacrificed it for the mission of her husband. You got to understand this, my dear brothers. And I just described to you what pre-Islamic situation was. And here, this successful businesswoman, the CEO of her business, you know, this guy is coming to her and says, now I'm going to like change the whole system. You know, the first thought on any person who is just business-minded would say, man, this is not good for business. I'm going to lose everything. But the relationship between Lady Khadija and the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was such that she believed him, she trusted him, and he said, if you're saying that, must be true, and I'm all in. With my wealth, with my life, with whatever it takes. She funded the whole migration of the Muslims when they left Makkah to go to Abyssinia. That was funded by Lady Khadija. You know, there came a point in time when all the money was gone, when the whole society started to boycott them, and when the Shibi Abu Talib, okay, there was nobody would deal with them, nobody do business with them, nobody would associate with them in any way. They had come down to complete poverty. The narration said, the description say that they were actually taking leaves from the trees, grinding them down and eating the leaves. One of the richest women in Arabia at the time was brought down to this level for the sacrifice that she made for her husband's mission. This is not a small thing, my dear brothers and sisters. You know, it isn't surprising that later on, even when he was in Medina, and he had these other wives that were there. By the way, he never married another woman while he was married to Lady Khadija. He was married at the age of 25, and Lady Khadija died when? How many years after? Come on, we should, you know, so 15 years to when he announced the mission. So that was when he was 40. And then how many years? 13 years after that. So 28 years of marriage. Okay? He did not marry any other woman. Lady Khadija was it. And some of the wives would come to Rasulullah and he says, you know, why do you constantly think about that old woman? Because by the time she passed away, she was in her 50s. You know, so why you keep on thinking, I'm young, I'm beautiful, I'm this. I say, you don't understand what she meant to me, what she meant to my mission. You know, he says, I can never forget her. Then when she was being buried, he took his abaya out and put it on her. It's one of the saddest scenes, you know, in Islam. And that's, again, not the mission that I have. But this is the relationship that our Prophet had with his wife. Completely contrary to how women were being treated pre-Islamic era. So it wasn't like he was just talking, he was practicing it, he was showing it. You know, it was as if the mission of Rasulullah had started already. You know, when they were calling him Al-Amin, Sadiq, you know, it wasn't because, you know, there was just a random title. He had already started by preaching Islam by action. He may not have said, I'm the Prophet. He may not have said, Qulu la ilaha illallah. But by his deeds, he was already started to preach. This was our Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the next question now is when they were married. I think it's the lady's turn. Okay? Who recited the khutbah of the nikah of our Holy Prophet with Lady Khadija? Abu Talib. Okay, so that's 2 points now for the ladies. The men are losing. Okay? This is not good. At some point in time, and I'm going to ask this question to the guys again. Okay? Yeah, you guys are going to get nothing anyway. Well, no, but you have to give them something. So, we all know that the Prophet was born in, what is that year known as? Amul Fil. This is not a quiz question. Okay? So, what year of Amul Fil was Ali ibn Abi Talib born? What year? This is for the guys now. How many years after the Prophet's birth was the birth of Ali ibn Abi Talib? You got it. It was 30 years. Okay? You got 1 point still. You short 1 more point. I have to find some bonus question here. So, it was 30 years when Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam was born. Again, mission has not been announced yet. He had not announced the prophetic mission. He was preaching Islam by his actions, by his deeds. until when he turned 40 years old, which makes Imam Ali how old? About 10 years old. Okay, if you do the math. Okay, and he then did that. Everybody knows about the Dawatul Zul Ashira, called the people of his the nearest kin and relatives, and he then announced his prophethood. And you all know that the first person to stand up to say that, I believe in you, I'm going to be your wasi. Prophet said, who's going to be my successor, my khalifa, my wasi, my inheritors, and so on and so forth. The 10-year-old boy stood up and said, Mi ya Rasulullah, Mi ya Rasulullah. And every time he said that, Rasulullah would tell him to sit down again. It was so bad, it was such a moment that people turned to Abu Talib. And he said to Abu Talib, because Abu Talib was the father of Imam Ali, and they said to him, they were mocking him. They said, one day you will have to, believe that your son is going to be like the Imam, the guide, for you. They were mocking him, So in summation, my brothers and sisters, we are now at a state, where, the beginning of the mission of our Holy Prophet started. To summarize, I just stated what the situation of Arabia was, and then we described the circumstances in which the Prophet was born and the circumstances in which he grew up. Okay? The first positive things that started to happen with the Prophet, of course, was his marriage to Lady Khadija. For those of you who, for whatever reason, are staying away from marriage, because if specifically, if it is because I don't have a job, I don't have income, I don't have a way to support myself, okay? I mentioned this before. Allah promises in the Quran that, do yughnihimullahu min fadli, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make you independent, will grant you the wealth to get over it. Here we see that example, that after the marriage to Lady Khadija, the tables, start to turn for Rasulullah. Mission is not over because the kuffar are still there. Up until he announces his mission, everybody was cool with Rasulullah. And the minute, pretty much the moment that he announced that he was the messenger of Allah, he was this Qulu la ilaha illallah tuflihu, and says, believe in one God. We're not gonna believe in all these polytheistic things. We're gonna, destroy all the idols. Okay? This person who was a Sadiq, who was Al-Amin, who was this trustworthy person who they were trusting him with all their wealth, became the biggest enemy of the most powerful people in Mecca. The most influential people in Mecca became the enemies of the Prophet. And he had to navigate now, from this point to reform the entire nation. I just basically, we're going to end here, wanted to illustrate that sometimes in life we think of the circumstances that surround us, that there are situations that we will never be able to overcome it. And sometimes if you do reality checks, they do seem to be like that. But then never underestimate the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah wills for your success, then no matter what powers are over you, no matter how you perceive your enemies or your adversaries to be, you will be able to overcome it as long as we hold on to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's so important, my dear brothers and sisters, because don't fall for the trap of shaitan who makes you and I think that our life's remote control is in our hands. I can press whatever channel in my life that I want to watch. And all the time I want to watch something good. If I don't like something, I'm going to just change the channel. And then the problem with reality is that when you change the channel, the problem is still there. The same pictures come up. The same problems stay with you. They don't go away. The only time they go away is I said, Ya Allah, the remote is in your hands. You change my circumstance. You fix my problems. And that's how it goes. Look at the disadvantaged situation that our Holy Prophet was in and how he was able to not reform only the people in those days, my dear brothers and sisters. Understand one thing. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Not only, just understand the geographical situation of Saudi Arabia, the Hijaz. On one side is the Red Sea. On the other side is an endless desert. So in essence, the people who lived in Hijaz had really no communication or very little communication with people outside there. You know, obviously later on things changed. But in those days when the societies, the communities were smaller, that communication with the outside world was not there. And in these very circumstances, our Holy Prophet, through obviously because of the mission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was able to overcome all of this by his deeds, by his actions, by his words, by his akhlaq, by infinite amount of everything good that you can possibly think of. Reform the society of these days, the effects of which are lasting until today. This is not a small thing. And that is why you can't talk about Islam as something that is just, you know, a side pocket religion that I'm going to just practice it when it's convenient for me. It's part of the code of our lives, and it's with us every second of our life. Every second of our life. You can't disconnect from it at all. To end, I'm going to just talk about the characters of Rasulullah described by Amirul Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. You know, there are many ahadiths describing the Prophet, but we take authenticity from Amirul Mu'mineen because this is an excerpt of one of his khutbahs or one of the sermons based on the footnote that I read from Nahjul Balagha. Okay, and his description of our Holy Prophet, Imam Ali alayhi salam. He says, he, our Holy Prophet, was not vulgar, nor did he condone vulgarity, and he was not one to shout in the marketplace. Very disciplined person. He did not reward evil with evil. He was not vindictive. He would forgive, and he would overlook situations and forgive the people. He continues to say, he was continually smiling. The demeanor of our Holy Prophet was always like this serious. You know, those of you who have been to Saudi Arabia, and you go and you visit some of the, to recite in Masjid al-Haram, or you come across any one of these mutawifs, you know, with the big beards who are guarding the area there, there is no nur in their face. You know, they're not smiling. Contrary to how the personality of the Prophet was. He was continually smiling, gentle in manners, soft in nature. He was not severe, harsh-hearted, loud, abusive, or miserly. This is the description of our Holy Prophet. He would disregard that which he disliked. You know, he would not like carry on a grudge, and no one ever despaired of him. Everybody that came to him was hopeful that when they leave, they're going to get something from him. He never responded the disparagement or evil words. He forbade upon himself three things. Listen to this. He forbade on himself arguing with people. He forbade himself arrogance and those things which did not concern him. He minded his own business. Was not worried about other people's business. And he relieved the people of three things. He would not degrade anyone around him. He would not say, oh, that guy, you know, he's nothing. He would not be insulting. He would not degrade anybody. He would not search after their honor or private matters. He was not a person to go and gossip about people. And he would not speak except in matters which he hoped would benefit the people. When he spoke, now, you know, this is one of the most difficult things for any person, you know, when they have an audience, to get attention from people. And Rasulullah said, when he spoke, Imam Ali as-salam says, when Rasulullah spoke, his attendees would lower their heads as if birds had aligned to listen to some powerful message. That was the personality of our Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So my dear brothers and sisters, in ending, if our love and attachment to the Holy Prophet is just words, then we are denying ourselves something really important in our lives. It should not be only words, it should be his seerah, the way he conducted himself. We need to become or try to become like our Holy Prophet. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq, first to learn about him, to learn to love him dearly. So much so, there is a hadith that says that, those who love the Prophet even more than their parents, it is as if that they are guaranteeing themselves paradise. Learn to love the Holy Prophet. Learn to follow his seerah. And then, learn about his life, and try and get something from them that we can apply to the lives that we live in. Because no matter what, nothing, we cannot say that was for then and it doesn't apply for now. Everything that was for then also applies to the now, and we will continue to apply for the future as well. Please recite aloud salawat. In ending, let us again remember all of our marhumin and recite Surah Al-Fatiha and pray for their maghfirah.
برادران خوره عزیز، 2 هفته میشه که مدرسه مرکز اسلامی از زهرا آغاز شده و روزهای شنبه. بعض از والدین یک چند سوال داشتن، از خاطر از برادر ما جناب علیرضا جوانشیر خواهش میکنیم که فقط برای 5 دقیقه بر کسایی که سوال داشتن سوالاتشان در مورد مدرسه برشان هم معلومات میده، هم پاسخ میده سوالایشان. یک موضوع بسیار مهم و اساسی است. مدرسه مرکز اسلامی زهرا برای آینده سازان این کمیونیتی که ما هستیم بسیار مهم است. انشاءالله معلومات مفیده که برتان آرام میشه، همگی ازش استفاده میکنیم.
تشکر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. یرفع الله الذین آمنوا منکم والذین اوتوا العلم درجات والله بما تعملون خبیر. خداوند کسانی را که ایمان آورده اند و کسانی که دانش داده شده اند به درجات بالا میبرد و خداوند با آنچه انجام میدهید آگاه است. Assalamu alaikum and Eid Mubarak to everybody. I would like to go through, give you guys some information. برادران و خواهران راجع به سطر اسکول آخر هفته براتون یک معلومات خصوصی میدم. کسی در سوال داره میدن در آخر از میدن که پرسان کنن. سطر اسکول ما 2 هفته است که شروع شده، از تاریخ 14 سپتامبر شروع شده. ما تقریبا 8 کلاس داریم، 4 کلاس قرآن، 4